But just to move on to landscape, I mean, clearly the one thing your work in recent years is you've been working in eco-criticism within and around Irish material. So for those people who are listening in who are maybe not familiar with this kind of work, methodology, whatever you wish to call it, do you just want to outline what eco-criticism means and how it works?
Yeah, so, you know, when I began working in the field, the definition probably would have been quite different. And it's certainly, you know, us academics, we like to create waves, right? So I guess we're in the second wave, almost third wave of what eco-criticism is as a critical lens, right? And I think that evolution has been amazing and wonderful, and really what began as a study of more the aesthetic representation of the natural world has evolved for us to more closely, I think Lawrence Buell kind of defined this as the second wave, more closely look at some of the ethical considerations and imperatives of how we represent the natural world, and what are the implications of that for how we act within it and inhabit it. But I think most eco-critics might agree, and I might get emails after this, but most would agree that eco-criticism is really just an attempt to look at the ways cultural text construct, represents, and reflect the human existence as a part of the natural world. And what's exciting about that is it's cultural text pretty broadly defined. So literature, of course, but film, photography, I think there are a lot of ways we can bring that study to our conversation.
So in a way, it is that kind of perfect, I think what many of us within Irish studies talk about and dream about and argue about, the great kind of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary subject that most of us then don't actually do. Eco-criticism, as you say, because you're dealing with such rich textual forms, representational forms, as you say, photography, literature, etc. It really does allow you to ask very big questions for how this issue of landscape represented and consumed in multiple different levels.
Yeah, it is. And I actually think that that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of bridge a dialogue between what had been and is no longer, but had been largely a North American kind of critical lens of eco-criticism with Irish studies. That was kind of the impulse behind the first anthology that I did. And, you know, if I were editing that today, it would look probably much different, but it was just an attempt to begin a conversation. Because I think Irish studies actually has so much to offer the field of eco-criticism because of that interdisciplinarity that's really authentic. We have conversations across disciplines. It's a necessary part of what it means, I think, to study Ireland and study this particular cultural phenomenon. And so I think that, you know, we've already done that in Irish studies in such beautiful ways over time. I still think both in Irish studies and in eco-criticism, we still are fairly siloed. Irish studies, we oral attend panels by historians and at conferences, or we'll read those things. We don't perhaps integrate it enough into our own study itself. I think that's just, the academy does lots to perpetuate those silos, but I think more than other areas of study, Irish studies does that and has a history of that, which is why it feels like such an important place for eco-criticism to happen, because I think Irish studies can in fact enhance eco-critical agendas and pursuits and impact.
Joe, were you?
Well, I'm just fascinated by what you say, actually. And of course, I'm wondering why Irish studies can do this. I mean, what is very specific about Ireland? I thought we were getting away over here for a while about Irish exceptionalism, that thing that drove us into believing that we're in some way superior, not just different, but in some way superior to everything else. What's it about Irishness? Is it simply the breadth of the various disciplines that are brought together under the context of Irish studies? Or what's about Irishness that makes us in some way superior to those others who've got a tradition to draw upon?
Yeah, and I guess I wouldn't call it superior, but maybe distinct. Good. In the sense that, as an island culture, as an island, the topography, as one Ireland that has been largely defined by a pretty explicit political border in the center of the island. So this conception of border has become really central to a collective memory, whereas a lot of the environmental, in order to do environmental work, we have to, as humans, kind of let go of these arbitrary borders, because environmental crises and ecology doesn't care about them. So that kind of tension of being politically defined by borders, but yet when looking at environmental problems and conversations, we have to learn how to dissolve those borders if we're going to actually understand environmental impact. I think too, so that the political history, I think, is important. The island topography, the degree to which the specificity of the landscape, so the kind of the natural history of the island, the lack of arability, for example, of the West, and what that's meant for human relationship to the land, of trying to use it sustainably, the impact of things like the potato blight and the famine, and what that meant for the human density and human population of the island. Right. So I think there's just some distinctions that can help us to think about what questions we should be asking when we work with eco-criticism.
I'm sure that we're going to get around to actually talking about the moment that we're in and the Anthropocene, but even just pressing a bit further on the question of the famine, what would eco-criticism tell us about the causes of the famine? Now, people get very, very emotional about the causes of the famine. And it's perfidy from England, or what would eco-critics say about that is new to us, that we should know, that we should think about as we imagine the future, about what caused the famine?
That's a good question. I've not thought of, Joe, but I think it's
maybe it's an unfair question, Christina.
No, I think it's really, if you'll indulge me, I'll try to work through it a little bit. I think with the concept, I think what eco-critics would look at is the consequence of denying the political and human impact on the natural world. So by saying, oh, it's just a blight that happened, right, without looking at any of the context of political, it takes away responsibility from human actors of that story, which of course is not fair and not a testimony to what actually happened. So by saying that the natural world is just this separate force that we can't, we are at its mercy always, and we of course are to a degree, but we are also a part of it, and therefore we can take actions that would impact the degree to which it has fatal consequences.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.